The ivory keys sang beneath her fingers like a dying man's last prayer. And when Ophelia Zimmerman looked up through the dim lamplight of the empty saloon, she saw him standing in the doorway with dust on his shoulders and something broken in his eyes. It was late September in 1883, and the Colorado sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving Pueblo wrapped in the kind of darkness that made men think about their sins. Ophelia had been playing for nearly an hour, her slender fingers dancing across the weathered piano keys with practiced ease, filling the vacant room with music that nobody paid for and nobody seemed to want. The Silver Star Saloon wouldn't open for another 2 hours, but she always came early, always played when the world felt too heavy to carry on her own. She wore a deep blue dress that her mother had sent from Philadelphia 3 years ago, before the consumption took her, before Ophelia found herself alone at 22 with nothing but a talent for music and a one-way ticket west. Her dark hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes held the kind of sadness that comes from watching too many dreams die young. The cowboy in the doorway didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading purple sky, his hat pulled low enough that she couldn't make out his features. But she could feel his attention like a physical thing, heavy and focused and surprisingly gentle. Most men who came to the Silver Star looked at her like she was part of the furniture, something decorative to glance at between whiskey shots and card games. This one looked at her like she was playing just for him. Ophelia's fingers faltered on the keys, and the melody stumbled. She cleared her throat and started again, this time choosing something softer, something that spoke of longing and distance and the ache of wanting things you couldn't name. The cowboy took a single step inside, then another, moving with the careful grace of someone who had learned to walk quietly or die trying. "We're not open yet," she said, her voice carrying across the empty room. It came out softer than she intended, lacking conviction. "I know," he replied. His voice was rough, like gravel under wagon wheels, but there was something underneath it that caught her attention. Kindness, maybe, or exhaustion deep enough to drown in. "I wasn't looking for a drink. I was just passing by and I heard the music." He moved closer now, and the lamplight caught his face. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw sharp enough to draw blood. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent and searching. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, white against tan skin. His clothes were road-worn but clean, and he wore his gun low on his hip like a man who knew how to use it but didn't particularly want to. "You play beautiful," he said, stopping a respectful distance from the piano. "Like nothing I've ever heard before." Ophelia felt heat rise to her cheeks and she looked down at the keys to hide it. "Thank you. I learned back east before I came out here. Philadelphia," her eyes snapped up to meet his. "How did you know that?" He offered a small smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "Lucky guess. You've got that Eastern way about you, refined, like you're still surprised by how rough things are out here." "I've been in Pueblo for 3 years," she said, a touch defensive. "I'm not some delicate flower who faints at the sight of dirt. Didn't say you were." He removed his hat, holding it respectfully in both hands. "I'm Theo Irving. Friends call me Theo." Ophelia Zimmerman. She found herself smiling despite her earlier wariness. "Nobody calls me anything but Ophelia, though my mother used to call me Leah when I was small." "Would you mind if I sat and listened for a while?" Theo asked. "I'll leave before the place opens if you want. I just haven't heard real music in a long time, and your playing sounds like something worth hearing." She should have said no. She should have told him the saloon had rules about visitors before opening, that Mr. Patterson didn't like strange men hanging around his piano player, that she didn't know him from Adam and had no business letting him linger. Instead, she nodded toward the nearest table. "Sit, wherever you like. But I warn you, I'm practicing. It might not be as pretty as what you heard from outside." Theo settled into a chair with his back to the wall, a position that let him watch both her and the door. Old habits, she thought, the kind that kept a man alive in dangerous country. He set his hat on the table and waited, his full attention on her in a way that made her heart beat faster. Ophelia began to play again, and this time the music came easier, flowing from somewhere deep inside her chest, where she kept all the things she couldn't say out loud. She played about loneliness and hope, about the way the prairie looked at sunrise, and the sound rain made on the saloon's tin roof. She played about her mother's death and her father's disappearance into a bottle, and the strange, aching freedom of being utterly alone in the world. Time passed in a blur of notes and melodies. She forgot about the approaching opening time, forgot about the crowds that would soon fill the room with cigar smoke and loud voices. She played, and Theo listened with the kind of focused intensity that made her feel like every note mattered, like the music she created had genuine worth beyond its ability to mask the sound of gambling and drinking. When she finally looked up, nearly 40 minutes had passed. Theo hadn't moved except to lean forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes never leaving her face. The lamplight painted shadows across his features, making him look younger and older all at once. "That was something else," he said quietly. "That last piece especially." "Where did you learn it?" "I didn't learn it. I made it up just now." His eyebrows rose. "You can just make up music like that, on the spot. Sometimes, when I'm feeling it strongly enough." She stood, smoothing her skirt, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "You should probably go now. Mr. Patterson will be here any minute to open up, and he doesn't like unexpected visitors." Theo rose as well, moving with that same careful grace. He was tall, she noticed, nearly a foot taller than her own 5 feet and 4 inches. "Will you be here tomorrow night?" "I'm here every night." "It's my job." "Then I'll come back tomorrow, if that's all right with you." She should have said no again. Should have told him that she didn't need some drifter cowboy hanging around making her nervous and distracting her from work. But something in his eyes stopped her, something vulnerable and honest that she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. "I come early to practice most days," she heard herself say. "Around sunset, before the crowds arrive." His smile was worth the risk. "I'll see you tomorrow then, Ophelia Zimmerman." He left without another word, settling his hat back on his head and disappearing into the evening darkness. Ophelia stood by the piano, her hands trembling slightly, wondering what she had just started. Mr. Patterson arrived 15 minutes later, a portly man with a handlebar mustache and the perpetually worried expression of someone who owned property in a rough town. He nodded at Ophelia, barely glancing her way as he began lighting the rest of the lamps and preparing the bar for the night's business. The evening passed as it always did. Cowboys and miners filtered in, ordering whiskey and beer, dealing cards and telling lies. Ophelia played requested songs and popular tunes, her fingers moving automatically while her mind wandered elsewhere. She thought about storm gray eyes and that rough voice speaking with such quiet appreciation. She thought about the way Theo had listened, really listened, like her music meant something more than background noise. It was past midnight when she finally left the saloon, exhausted and aching from hours at the piano. The September night had turned cold, and she pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders as she walked the 3 blocks to the boarding house where she rented a small room. The streets of Pueblo were relatively quiet at this hour, most of the serious drinkers still inside the various saloons and gambling halls that lined the main thoroughfare. She climbed the narrow stairs to her second-floor room, lit the oil lamp by her bed, and sat by the window looking out at the dark shapes of buildings and distant mountains. Tomorrow, he would come back. Tomorrow she would play for him again, and the thought filled her with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation, hope, the dangerous flutter of possibility. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, her dreams were full of music and gray eyes and the feeling of being truly heard for the first time in years. True to his word, Theo appeared in the saloon doorway the next evening just as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. Ophelia had been there for 20 minutes already, warming up with scales and exercises, trying to calm the nervous energy that had plagued her all day. When she looked up and saw him standing there in the same respectful, quiet way, something in her chest loosened and tightened all at once. "Evening," he said, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "I wasn't sure if you really meant it about me coming back. I said you could." She kept her hands on the keys, finding courage in the familiar ivory beneath her fingers. "Unless you've had second thoughts about listening to me practice." "Not even a little bit." He moved to the same table as before, settling in with his back to the wall. This time she noticed the way he moved, fluid but careful, like someone who had been hurt before and learned from it. "Play whatever you want. I'm just happy to listen." So she did. She played everything from classical pieces she'd learned as a child to popular songs she'd picked up in the saloon to new melodies that formed themselves under her fingers as she went. Theo listened to it all with that same intense focus, occasionally closing his eyes as if he could see the music better that way. After an hour, she paused to rest her hands. "You never told me what brings you to Pueblo." "Work, mostly. I've been trailing cattle from Texas to Denver for the past 4 years. We just finished a drive last week, and I figured I'd stay around for a while before heading back south." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What about you? What made you leave Philadelphia for Colorado?" "My mother died 3 years ago. Consumption. My father started drinking after that and eventually just disappeared. I had no other family, no money, and no prospects. A friend of my mother's had moved to Pueblo and said I could work as a seamstress in her shop, so I came west." She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing down, a nervous habit. "Turned out she died of influenza 2 months before I arrived. Mr. Patterson needed a piano player, and here I am." "That's a hard story," Theo said softly. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that." "What about you?" she asked, deflecting the sympathy that made her throat tight. "Where are you from originally?" "Kansas, mostly. Little town you've never heard of. My father was a farmer until a bad drought killed everything 3 years running. He died trying to save the farm. Heart gave out while he was plowing a field that would never grow anything again." Theo's jaw tightened. "My mother remarried after that, a man who didn't much care for having another man's son around, so I left at 18 and started working cattle drives. That's hard too." "We've both had our share of it, I suppose." He met her eyes across the dimly lit room. "But listening to you play, I can hear something good survived in you, something worth protecting." The words settled between them like a promise or a prayer. Ophelia felt exposed, seen in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. She started playing again before she could think too hard about what his words meant or what she wanted them to mean. This became their routine. Every evening before the saloon opened, Theo would arrive and settle into his table, and Ophelia would play for him. Not for the empty room or for herself, but for him specifically, choosing pieces that she thought he might enjoy or creating new melodies inspired by the look in his eyes or the way he smiled when she played something particularly beautiful. After a week, they started talking more. Theo told her about life on the cattle trails, about the vast emptiness of the open range and the strange brotherhood that formed among men who spent months together moving livestock across dangerous country. He told her about sandstorms and river crossings, about the night sky when you were days from any town, about learning to trust your horse more than most people you'd meet. Ophelia told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her mother's kindness and her father's weakness, about the shock of coming west and finding a world so different from everything she'd known. She told him about the loneliness of playing music every night for people who barely noticed she existed, about the ache of creating beauty in a place that seemed designed to crush beautiful things. "You ever think about leaving Pueblo?" Theo asked one evening in mid-October. The weather had turned cold and frost painted the windows in delicate patterns. "Going somewhere else where people might appreciate what you can do all the time," she admitted. "But it takes money to travel and I barely make enough to pay for my room and meals. Besides, where would I go? Denver? San Francisco? Those places are even rougher than here and I'd have no connections, no way to find work." "You could always get married," Theo suggested, then immediately looked uncomfortable, as if the words had slipped out without permission. "I mean, that's what most women do when they need security." "I won't marry just for security," Ophelia said firmly. "I watched my mother do that the first time before she met my father. She told me once that marrying without love is like living in a beautiful prison. You might have everything you need, but you're still trapped." "That's wise of her." Theo's voice softened. "My mother married for security the second time, and I could see it killing her spirit every day. That's part of why I left. I couldn't watch her become someone else just to survive." Their eyes met across the space between the piano and his table, and something passed between them that was too large for words. Want and fear and recognition all tangled together. Ophelia's hands trembled slightly on the keys, and she had to look away before she said something foolish or true. By the third week, Theo started arriving even earlier, helping her move music sheets around or adjusting the piano bench when it stuck. Small gestures of helpfulness that brought him closer to her, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something distinctly him. Close enough that when their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same sheet of music, the contact sent electricity up her arm. "Sorry," he murmured, pulling back as if he'd touched something hot. "It's all right." But her voice came out breathless, giving away too much. One evening in late October, after she'd finished playing a particularly emotional piece about longing and loss, Theo stood and walked to the piano. He didn't sit beside her on the bench, but he stood close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was rough, raw with something she couldn't quite name. "Of course. You feel it too, this thing between us?" He looked almost pained asking it, vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely allowed himself to be. "Or am I making a fool of myself by thinking there's something here worth exploring?" Ophelia's heart hammered against her ribs. Every sensible instinct she possessed screamed at her to be careful, to protect herself, to remember that men like Theo Irving were drifters who never stayed long in one place. But when she looked into his eyes and saw the genuine fear there, the real possibility of rejection and hurt, she couldn't lie. "I feel it," she whispered. "I've felt it since that first night when you stood in the doorway and listened like my music actually mattered." The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers that were surprisingly gentle. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, about this." I know I should probably head back to Texas for the winter work, but I keep finding reasons to stay in Pueblo, to come here every evening and listen to you play. I practice every night because I know you'll be here, she confessed. I choose songs I think you'll like. I play for you, Theo. Only you, Ophelia. Her name on his lips sounded like music, like prayer, like something sacred that deserved protection. I don't have much. I live drive to drive, town to town. I can't offer you security or fancy things or any kind of stable life. But if you'll have me, I swear I'll do everything I can to make you happy. I don't need fancy things, she said, turning her face into his hand. I just need someone who sees me, who listens, who understands that music isn't just something I do but something I am. I see you. He leaned closer, his other hand coming up to frame her face, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. I see you, and you're the most beautiful thing I've ever encountered. When he kissed her, it was soft and questioning, asking permission even as he took it. Ophelia's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself fall into the sensation of his lips against hers, warm and present and real. Her hands came up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself against the dizzying rush of feeling that threatened to overwhelm her. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ophelia felt like something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the world. Like before this moment, she had been playing music in black and white, and now suddenly everything was in color. I should probably ask if you're courting anyone, Theo said, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Before I get too attached. She laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. No, there's no one else. There hasn't been anyone since I came to Pueblo. Most men here don't know what to do with a woman who plays piano and reads books. Their loss is my gain. He kissed her forehead, tender and reverent. So we're doing this, really doing this. I want to, she said honestly. But I need to know you're serious, Theo. I can't give my heart to someone who's going to disappear with the next cattle drive. I've lost too many people already. I can't lose someone else I care about. I'm serious. His hands were still on her face, his thumbs stroking gentle circles on her cheeks. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I'll find work here in Pueblo, stable work, something that keeps me close to you, I promise. Okay, she smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Okay, Theo Irving, let's see where this goes. They sealed the promise with another kiss, this one sweeter and more confident than the first. Outside, the sun had fully set, and the first customers would be arriving soon. But for this moment, in the dim lamplight of the empty saloon, with the piano behind her and this good man in front of her, Ophelia Zimmerman felt like she had finally found something worth holding on to. The next weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing affection. Theo found work at the stockyards on the edge of Pueblo, managing incoming cattle and helping coordinate shipping to Denver and points east. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it paid enough for him to rent a small room at a boarding house 2 blocks from Ophelia's. They fell into a comfortable pattern. Theo would finish work in time to clean up and arrive at the Silver Star just before sunset. Ophelia would already be there, waiting at the piano with barely contained excitement that she tried and failed to hide. They would talk for a few minutes, sharing stories about their days, and then she would play for him while he listened with that same intense focus that had captured her attention from the beginning. On Sunday afternoons, when the saloon was closed and Ophelia had free time, they would walk together through Pueblo's streets, exploring the growing town and learning about each other in the patient way of people who believe they have time. Theo was gentle and respectful, always mindful of her reputation, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the tension between them grew stronger each day, the pull of wanting and waiting becoming almost unbearable. November brought cold winds and the first significant snowfall. Ophelia invested in a heavier coat, and Theo bought her a pair of fur-lined gloves that must have cost him a week's wages. She protested the expense, but he insisted, wrapping the gloves around her hands himself, and saying that he couldn't stand the thought of her fingers getting frostbitten when they created such beautiful music. "You're too generous," she told him, but she kept the gloves and wore them every day, thinking of him each time she pulled them on. "Not generous enough," he replied. "You deserve everything good in the world, Ophelia." They had their first real disagreement in mid-November, when Theo mentioned that he'd been offered a chance to join a major cattle drive heading to Montana in the spring. The pay would be excellent, enough to set them up properly if they decided to marry, but it would mean being gone for 5 or 6 months. "Absolutely not," Ophelia said, her voice sharper than she intended. They were walking through the market district, and she stopped right there in the middle of the street, forcing him to turn and face her. "You promised you wouldn't leave. You said you'd stay in Pueblo." "I know what I said." Theo looked frustrated, running a hand through his hair. "But we need money, Ophelia. If we're going to build a life together, we need more than what I'm making at the stockyards. This job could give us that." "I don't care about money. I care about you being here, being present, not disappearing for half a year at a time." She could feel tears threatening, hot and angry behind her eyes. "My father disappeared. Everyone I've ever cared about has disappeared. I need someone who stays, Theo. That's what I need." His expression softened immediately, and he reached for her hands, gloves and all. "You're right, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about how it would feel for you. I was just thinking about providing, about being the kind of man who can take care of you properly." "I can take care of myself," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "What I can't do is survive falling in love with you and then losing you to the trail. Please don't ask me to do that." "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, pulling her into his arms right there in the street, despite the scandalized looks from passing townspeople. "I'll turn down the drive. The stockyards are enough. We're enough." She buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, letting herself believe that this time someone would actually stay. December arrived with heavy snow and temperatures cold enough to freeze the water in Ophelia's wash basin most mornings. The saloon stayed busy, with people seeking warmth and entertainment during the long winter nights. Ophelia played every evening, but now she found herself looking at the crowd differently, wondering how many of them had someone waiting for them at home, someone who made the cold nights bearable. She had Theo now. That knowledge sat in her chest like a warm coal, constant and comforting. He came every evening without fail, sitting at his usual table, watching her with eyes that held promises she was beginning to believe in. After the saloon closed, he would walk her home through the snow-covered streets, their breath making clouds in the frozen air, their hands clasped together despite the cold. On Christmas Eve, the saloon closed early. Mr. Patterson gave all his employees the night off, a rare gesture of generosity that had more to do with wanting to spend time with his own family than any particular concern for his workers. Ophelia found herself standing outside the Silver Star at only 9 o'clock, uncertain what to do with an unexpected free evening. Theo was waiting for her, as always. But instead of his usual work clothes, he wore a clean shirt and vest, and he'd trimmed his hair. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot in a way that was entirely unlike his usual steady composure. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, worry spiking through her chest. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted tonight to be special." He offered his arm, and she took it automatically. I have something to show you. He led her through the quiet streets, most of Pueblo's residents already home with their families. The snow had stopped falling earlier in the day, and everything was covered in a pristine white blanket that glittered under the moonlight. Their footsteps crunched softly, the only sound in the peaceful evening. They stopped in front of a small house on a quiet street near the edge of town. It was modest, just 3 rooms from what Ophelia could see, but it had a covered porch and a stone chimney from which smoke was currently rising. Warm lamplight glowed from the windows, making it look welcoming despite the cold. "What is this?" Ophelia asked, confused. "It's ours," Theo said quietly. "If you want it. I've been saving money since I started at the stockyards, and I got a good price on it because it needed work. I've spent the last month fixing it up in my spare time. It's not much, but it's sound and warm and paid for." Ophelia stared at the little house, then at Theo, then back at the house. "You bought us a house." "I bought us a future," he corrected. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Ophelia Zimmerman, I love you. I love your music and your strength and the way you see beauty in things even when the world tries to convince you there's nothing beautiful left. I want to marry you. I want to fill that house with music and laughter and all the good things we both deserve. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught in her throat. In the moonlight, with snow all around them and his eyes searching hers with desperate hope, Theo looked like something out of a fairy tale. Like the happy ending she'd stopped believing in years ago. "I love you too," she whispered, and watched joy transform his face. "Yes, Theo. Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her around in a circle that made them both laugh breathlessly. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that had been carefully restrained until now, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring months of wanting and waiting into the contact. "Can I see inside?" she asked when they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard and grinning like fools. "That's why we're here." He led her up the porch steps and opened the door, gesturing for her to enter first. The interior was simple but lovely. The main room had a stone fireplace where a fire crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on walls that had been recently painted. There was a small kitchen area with a wood stove and a table, and through an open door she could see a bedroom with a large bed, covered in a colorful quilt. But what made her gasp and press her hands to her mouth was the piano. It stood against one wall of the main room, older than the one at the Silver Star but well-maintained and beautiful. Theo must have seen her looking because he said, "I found it in Denver. Traded some work for it and hired a wagon to bring it down. I thought you should have a piano at home, so you can play whenever you want, not just at the saloon." Ophelia crossed to the piano, her fingers trembling as she touched the keys. She pressed down gently, and the sound that emerged was rich and full, perhaps even better than the saloon's piano. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. "How did you afford all this?" she asked through her tears. "I've been living on almost nothing and saving everything else. The house was cheap because of the repairs it needed, and I did all the work myself. The furniture came from various places. Some of it I built, some I traded for. The piano was the biggest expense, but it was worth it to see the look on your face right now." She turned from the piano and threw her arms around him, holding on tight. "You're the best man I've ever known, Theo Irving. I'm just a man who loves you," he said simply. "When do you want to get married?" "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we could." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest where her cheek pressed against it. "We need to arrange for a preacher and witnesses and all that. But soon, I promise. How about the day after New Year's?" "That gives us time to do it properly." "The day after New Year's," she agreed. "That's perfect." They spent the rest of Christmas Eve in their new home, sitting by the fire and making plans for their future together. Theo had already spoken to Mr. Patterson about Ophelia's situation, and the saloon owner had agreed to let her continue working evenings if she wanted, though Theo said they could manage on his salary alone if she preferred to stay home. "I want to keep playing," Ophelia said firmly. "Music is part of who I am, but I'll play because I want to, not because I have to. That makes all the difference." "Then you'll play," Theo agreed, "and I'll come listen every evening just like always. Won't you get tired of hearing me practice the same songs over and over?" "Never." He kissed her temple, gentle and sure. "I'll never get tired of hearing you play, Ophelia. Your music is what brought us together. It's precious to me." They stayed until late, reluctant to leave the warmth and promise of their new home. But eventually, propriety demanded that Ophelia return to her boarding house, at least until they were properly married. Theo walked her back through the silent, snow-covered streets, holding her close against the cold. "9 more days," he said when they reached her door. "9 days and you'll be my wife." 9 days, she echoed, already counting them. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a flurry of preparations. Ophelia gave notice at her boarding house and began packing her few possessions. She bought fabric and sewed herself a new dress for the wedding, pale blue silk that she found at the general store for a surprisingly reasonable price. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Chen, helped her with the fitting and refused payment for the assistance, saying that young love deserved all the help it could get. Theo worked extra hours at the stockyards to make sure they'd have money set aside for emergencies. He also spoke to the local preacher, a kind man named Reverend Walsh, who agreed to perform the ceremony at the little church on the edge of town. They didn't have family to invite, but word spread quickly in a town like Pueblo, and several of their acquaintances promised to attend. On New Year's Eve, the saloon was packed with rowdy celebrants. Ophelia played popular songs and dance tunes, her fingers flying across the keys while her mind wandered to thoughts of tomorrow. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Theodore Irving. Tomorrow her real life would begin. During a brief break, Mr. Patterson approached her. He was slightly drunk, unusual for him, and he wore an expression that might have been fondness on his usually stern face. "You've been a good employee, Miss Zimmerman," he said gruffly. "I want you to know that you'll always have a place here at the Silver Star if you want it. Your young man seems like good people, and I'm happy for you both." "Thank you, Mr. Patterson. That means a great deal to me. Play something special for midnight," he suggested. "Something beautiful. God knows this rough crowd could use a little beauty in their lives." So when midnight arrived and the crowd counted down the final seconds of 1883, Ophelia played a piece she had composed herself over the past few weeks. It was about hope and new beginnings, about the courage it takes to trust someone with your heart, about the way love can redeem even the loneliest soul. The rowdy crowd quieted as she played, drawn into the music despite themselves, and when she finished, the applause was genuine and warm. Theo was there in the crowd, she knew, though she couldn't see him from the piano. But she felt his presence like always, steady and sure and constant. Tomorrow he would be her husband. The thought made her smile as she launched into the next song, a lively dance tune that got the crowd moving again. January 2nd, 1884, dawned clear and bitterly cold. Ophelia woke early in her boarding house room for the last time, nerves and excitement making her stomach flutter. She dressed carefully in her new blue silk dress, pinned her dark hair up in the most elegant style she could manage, and studied herself in the small mirror. She looked different, she thought. Happier. More alive. Love had painted color back into her cheeks and light back into her eyes. She thought her mother would have been pleased to see her like this, would have approved of Theo and the life they were building together. Mrs. Chen arrived at 9 o'clock to help with final preparations, bringing a small bouquet of winter flowers that must have cost a fortune this time of year. "Every bride needs flowers," she insisted when Ophelia tried to refuse them. "You take them and be happy." The wedding was set for 10 o'clock. Mrs. Chen walked with Ophelia to the church, chattering nervously to fill the silence. The church was small and cold despite the fire someone had lit in the wood stove, but several people had already arrived. She recognized some regular customers from the saloon, Mr. Patterson and his wife, a few of Theo's co-workers from the stockyards. And there was Theo, standing at the front with Reverend Walsh, looking nervous and handsome in a clean black suit that she'd never seen him wear before. When his eyes found her walking down the aisle, his entire face transformed with such obvious joy and love that Ophelia felt her own eyes fill with tears. The ceremony was brief and simple. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Theo kissed her with gentle reverence, and the small gathering of witnesses applauded warmly. Afterward, several people had organized a modest celebration at the boarding house where Theo had been staying. There was food and even some music, though Ophelia was happy to let someone else provide entertainment for once. She stayed close to Theo's side, his arm around her waist, both of them slightly overwhelmed by the reality of what they'd just done. "How do you feel, Mrs. Irving?" Theo murmured in her ear during a quiet moment. "Like the luckiest woman in Colorado," she replied honestly. "How do you feel, Mr. Irving?" "Like I must have done something right in a previous life to deserve you." They left the celebration early, eager to begin their new life in their new home. The walk through Pueblo's streets felt different now, weighted with significance. She wasn't walking to someone else's house, or to a job, or to a temporary situation. She was walking home with her husband. The little house welcomed them with warmth, and the smell of the pine garland someone had hung over the doorway. Theo carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they tumbled together onto the rug in front of the fireplace, kissing and laughing and celebrating their union in the privacy of their own space. That night, they learned each other with patient tenderness, taking their time, both of them nervous and eager in equal measure. Theo was gentle and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Ophelia let herself trust him completely, opening herself to him in every way, and finding that the reality of physical love was even better than she'd imagined, when it was with someone who truly cared for you. Later, as they lay tangled together under the quilt on their bed, Theo traced patterns on her bare shoulder and said, "I want to give you everything good in the world." "You already have," she whispered back. "You've given me yourself. That's everything." The following weeks established the rhythm of their married life. Ophelia continued playing at the Silver Star most evenings, but now Theo would walk her there and back, and the late-night walks became some of her favorite parts of the day. They would talk about everything and nothing, their breath making clouds in the cold air, their hands clasped tight. During the day, while Theo worked at the stockyards, Ophelia kept their house and practiced her piano. She found herself composing more, creating new pieces inspired by her happiness. The music that flowed from her fingers now was different from before, richer and more complex, full of layers she hadn't been able to access when she was alone and lonely. February brought a blizzard that shut down most of Pueblo for 3 days. Ophelia and Theo were snowed in together, and they spent the time reading, talking, making love, and simply enjoying each other's presence. Theo taught her to play poker, and she taught him about music theory. They laughed more during those 3 days than Ophelia could remember laughing in years. "I hope we get snowed in like this every winter," she said, cuddled against him on the third evening while wind howled outside their warm little house. "We might not have a choice," Theo replied, kissing the top of her head. "Colorado winters are no joke. But as long as I'm snowed in with you, I'll count it as a blessing." March arrived with the first hints of spring, and with it came news that made Ophelia's heart sink. The stockyards where Theo worked were closing down temporarily. A dispute between the owners and the railroad meant that cattle couldn't be shipped east, and without shipping, there was no need for the staff who managed it. Theo and all the other workers were let go with 1 week's pay and vague promises about rehiring once the dispute was resolved. "It'll be all right," Theo assured her when he came home with the news. "I'll find other work. There's always something." But finding work in Pueblo in early spring turned out to be harder than either of them anticipated. The town's economy was built largely around the railroad and cattle shipping, and with those industries disrupted, jobs were scarce. Theo tried everything from loading freight to construction work, but nothing steady materialized. They lived off Ophelia's salary from the saloon and the small savings they'd managed to accumulate. It was enough for necessities but not much else, and Ophelia could see the stress wearing on Theo. He'd always been the provider, the one who took care of things, and being unable to contribute financially ate at him. "We're managing," Ophelia told him one evening in late March as they ate a simple dinner of beans and bread. "I'm making enough to keep us going." "You shouldn't have to support us alone," Theo said, his voice tight with frustration. "I should be providing for you, not the other way around." "Marriage is a partnership," she said firmly. "Right now I'm working and you're looking for employment. When you find something, you'll work and I'll keep playing. We help each other. That's how this works." "I know you're right." He reached across the small table to take her hand. "I just hate feeling useless." "You're not useless. You're the man I love, and you're doing your best in difficult circumstances. That's all anyone can ask." But despite her reassurances, Ophelia worried. She could see Theo becoming more withdrawn, spending long hours walking through town looking for work that didn't exist. She worried that he would start to resent their situation, or, worse, start to resent her for being the one keeping them afloat. In early April, a solution presented itself from an unexpected source. Mr. Patterson approached Ophelia after her shift one evening with a proposition. "I've been thinking," he said in his usual gruff manner. "Business has been better since you started playing here. People come specifically to hear you, not just for the whiskey and cards. I want to expand, maybe add entertainment beyond just piano. But I need someone to help manage it, someone who understands music and performance." "What are you saying, Mr. Patterson?" "I'm saying I want to hire you as my entertainment manager. You'd still play piano, but you'd also book other performers, manage schedules, and handle all the artistic side of things. The pay would be better than what you're making now. 50% more, plus a small share of the profits if we do well." Ophelia's mind raced. 50% more would solve their immediate financial problems, and then some. But she needed to discuss it with Theo first, needed to make sure he wouldn't see it as her taking on even more responsibility while he had nothing. "Can I have a few days to think about it?" she asked. "Take a week. But don't wait too long. I want to have everything in place before summer when business picks up." She practically ran home, eager to share the news with Theo. She found him sitting on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. He looked up when he heard her approaching, and the tired smile he offered made her heart ache. "Mr. Patterson offered me a new position," she said without preamble, settling beside him on the porch step. Entertainment manager at the saloon. It would mean more money and more responsibility. She explained the offer in detail, watching his face carefully for signs of resentment or withdrawal. Instead, she saw something else entirely. Relief, pride, gratitude. "That's wonderful, Ophelia," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "You should absolutely take it. You've got a good head for music and people. You'll be excellent at it. You're not upset about me making more money while you're still looking for work." "I'm grateful," he said honestly. "I'm grateful that I have a wife smart enough and talented enough to get opportunities like this. And I'm grateful that we'll be able to pay our bills and eat something besides beans." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I know my pride has been bruised lately, but my love for you is bigger than my pride. If you taking this job keeps us afloat while I find my footing again, then that's what needs to happen." "I love you," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "We're going to be all right, Theo, I know it." "We are," he agreed, "because we have each other." Ophelia accepted Mr. Patterson's offer, and the new position brought immediate improvements to their situation. The increased pay meant they could afford better food and even start saving again. More than that, the creative challenge of booking performers and managing the saloon's entertainment revitalized Ophelia in ways she hadn't expected. She brought in a singing group from Denver, arranged for a traveling comedian to perform on weekends, and even convinced a skilled fiddle player to join her for musical duets. The Silver Star's business boomed, and Mr. Patterson was thrilled with the results. Meanwhile, Theo finally found steady work in May. A new construction company had started building houses on the expanding edge of Pueblo, and they needed experienced workers. The pay wasn't as good as the stockyards had been, but it was honest work and it was regular. Theo came home each evening tired and dusty but satisfied, having contributed to building something tangible. "How was your day?" became their ritual question each evening, sharing stories over dinner in their little house. Ophelia would tell him about the performers she was working with or difficult customers at the saloon. Theo would describe the houses going up, the techniques being used, the small triumphs and frustrations of construction work. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They were happy, genuinely happy, in the way that comes from building something together through difficult times. Their love deepened and matured, becoming less about the initial rush of attraction and more about the steady, sustaining warmth of true partnership. Summer arrived with intense heat that made Pueblo feel like an oven during the day. Ophelia started feeling unwell in late June, nauseous in the mornings and exhausted by evening. At first, she attributed it to the heat and her busy schedule, but when the symptoms persisted for 2 weeks, Mrs. Chen suggested she visit the town's doctor. Dr. Morrison was a stern older woman who had come west after her husband died, bringing modern medical knowledge to a town that desperately needed it. She examined Ophelia thoroughly, asked a series of personal questions, and then delivered news that left Ophelia stunned and speechless. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Irving. About 8 weeks along, I'd estimate. The baby should arrive sometime in February if all goes well." Ophelia walked home in a daze, her hand pressed unconsciously to her still flat stomach. A baby. She and Theo were going to have a baby. The news was overwhelming, terrifying, and absolutely wonderful all at once. Theo was already home when she arrived, having gotten off work early due to the oppressive heat. He took one look at her face and immediately stood, concern written across his features. "What's wrong? What happened?" "Nothing's wrong," she said quickly. "At least, I don't think anything's wrong. I'm just surprised." "Surprised by what?" "We're going to have a baby." The words came out soft, almost wondering. "I'm pregnant, Theo. We're going to be parents." His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock gave way to joy so profound it seemed to light him up from the inside. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of spun glass. "A baby," he breathed against her hair. "We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "I'm ecstatic." Terrified but ecstatic. He pulled back enough to look at her face, his eyes shining. "How do you feel?" "The same. Scared and happy and overwhelmed." She laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to the sound. "We're going to be parents, Theo. That's so much responsibility. What if we're terrible at it?" "We won't be terrible at it," he said with conviction. "We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else. And our child is going to be so loved, Ophelia. So incredibly loved." She believed him. Looking into his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, she believed that they could do this, that they could bring a new life into the world and give that child everything they'd both been missing for so long. Family, stability, love without conditions. The pregnancy progressed well despite the summer heat. Ophelia continued working at the saloon, though she had to adjust her schedule as she grew larger and more tired. Mr. Patterson was understanding, hiring an assistant to help with the heavier tasks and making sure she had a comfortable chair for when she needed to rest. Theo became almost comically protective, insisting on walking her everywhere and fretting over every little discomfort. He read every book about pregnancy and childbirth he could get his hands on, asking Dr. Morrison so many questions that the older woman finally told him to calm down before he worried himself into an early grave. "The baby will come when it's ready," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "Your wife is healthy, the pregnancy is progressing normally, and you need to relax, Mr. Irving. You're making everyone nervous." But Theo couldn't help himself. He built a cradle in their bedroom, sanded and finished it until it gleamed. He painted the walls with leftover paint from his construction job, making the space bright and welcoming. He even carved small animals to hang above the cradle, spending hours on the careful detail work. "You're nesting," Ophelia teased him one evening in October, watching him fuss with the cradle's placement for the 3rd time. "I just want everything to be perfect," he said, slightly defensive. "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be full of love, and that we have in abundance." Fall turned to winter, and Ophelia grew larger and more uncomfortable. By January, she had stopped working at the saloon entirely, too tired and ungainly to manage the evening hours. She spent her days at home, playing her piano when she had energy and resting when she didn't. Theo had taken a brief leave from the construction company, determined to be present when the baby arrived. On a cold February morning, 2 weeks before Dr. Morrison's estimated due date, Ophelia woke to cramping pains that grew steadily stronger. She touched Theo's shoulder, pulling him from sleep with gentle insistence. "I think it's time," she said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Theo was instantly awake and moving, pulling on clothes and helping her dress in a loose nightgown. He practically carried her the 6 blocks to Dr. Morrison's office, ignoring her protests that she could walk just fine. The doctor took one look at them and smiled knowingly. "Let's have a baby today, shall we?" The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the evening. Theo stayed by Ophelia's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragements and words of love. She clung to him through the worst of it, drawing strength from his presence. Finally, as the clock struck 9 in the evening, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at the cold air and bright lights. Dr. Morrison cleaned him quickly and placed him in Ophelia's arms, and the moment she looked down at his tiny, scrunched face, she fell in love all over again. "He's perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Theo, he's absolutely perfect." Theo touched their son's tiny hand with one finger, his own eyes wet. "He really is. Look at him. He's got your nose." "And your chin," she said, smiling through her exhaustion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Ophelia knew exactly what he should be called. "James," she said. "James Theodore Irving, after your father and you." Theo looked at her with such profound gratitude and love that it took her breath away. "Are you sure? You wanted to name him after your father?" "My father left," she said gently. "Your father stayed and fought for his family even when it killed him. That's the kind of man I want our son to grow up to be, strong and loyal and willing to fight for what matters." "James Theodore Irving," Theo repeated, testing the sound of it. He leaned down to kiss both Ophelia and the baby, his family, his whole world. "Welcome to the world, James. Your mother and I have been waiting for you." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James was a healthy baby with strong lungs and firm opinions about when he wanted to eat, which seemed to be constantly. Ophelia and Theo stumbled through those early weeks in a haze of sleepless nights and overwhelming love, learning as they went, supporting each other through the challenges. Mrs. Chen and several other women from town brought food and advice, helping Ophelia navigate the mysteries of motherhood. Theo took on extra responsibilities at home, cooking and cleaning and walking the floor with James when he wouldn't sleep, giving Ophelia time to rest and recover. By spring, they had found their rhythm. Ophelia started playing piano at the saloon again, though only a few nights a week. Mr. Patterson had hired another pianist to cover the nights she stayed home, but he insisted that she remain as entertainment manager, handling bookings and schedules from home when needed. Theo's construction work continued steady, and he'd been promoted to foreman, overseeing a crew of workers and earning a better wage. They were more comfortable financially than they'd ever been, able to save money and occasionally afford small luxuries. James thrived, growing quickly and developing a personality that was equal parts stubborn determination and sweet affection. He loved music, would calm instantly when Ophelia played piano, his small body relaxing as the notes washed over him. Theo insisted this was proof that their son had inherited his mother's musical talent, though Ophelia laughed and said it was too early to tell. One evening in late May, when James was just over 3 months old, Ophelia returned to the saloon to play for the first time in weeks. She'd missed it more than she expected, missed the creative outlet and the satisfaction of performing. Theo came with her, carrying James in his arms, and settled at his usual table near the piano. She played for them, for her family, just like she had played for Theo alone in those early days before they fell in love. But now the music was richer, fuller, containing all the joy and struggle and deep satisfaction of the life they'd built together. She played about love that grows stronger through challenge, about family forged from loneliness, about hope that refuses to die even in the harshest conditions. When she finished the last piece, the entire saloon erupted in applause. But Ophelia only had eyes for Theo and James, watching as her husband gently clapped their son's small hands together in imitation of the crowd's response. Theo caught her eye and mouthed 3 words across the dim, crowded room. "I love you." She smiled and mouthed them back, then turned to the keys again, ready to play another song, another story, another chapter in the life they were writing together, one note at a time. The years that followed were good ones, full of the small joys and ordinary struggles that make up a meaningful life. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved music and building things, combining both his parents' talents in unexpected ways. He would sit under the piano while Ophelia practiced, constructing elaborate structures from wooden blocks while humming along with her playing. In 1887, when James was 3 years old, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less surprise and more quiet satisfaction, a sense of their family continuing to grow in the way they'd always hoped. The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Ophelia knew what to expect, and in December, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Margaret Rose, after Theo's grandmother who had been kind to him during his difficult childhood. Margaret was smaller than James had been but equally healthy, with dark hair like her mother and gray eyes like her father. James was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding, his small face serious with the responsibility of being an older brother. The little house that had seemed perfect for two now felt crowded with four. So Theo used his savings and construction skills to add 2 rooms, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. He worked on it in the evenings and weekends, and by the time Margaret was 6 months old, they had a proper bedroom for the children and a larger living space. Ophelia's career continued to flourish. The Silver Star Saloon had become known throughout Colorado for its quality entertainment, and Mr. Patterson credited Ophelia entirely for the success. He made her a full partner in 1888, giving her a percentage of ownership that provided substantial income for her family. She continued playing piano several nights a week, but now she also mentored other musicians, helping them develop their skills and find their own voices. Theo's construction company expanded as Pueblo grew, and he became one of the most respected builders in the area. He specialized in homes for working families, always remembering what it felt like to need a safe, comfortable place to live and struggling to afford it. His prices were fair and his work was excellent, and there was always more demand than he could meet. They were prosperous, happier than either had imagined possible during those lonely early days when they'd first met. But prosperity didn't change them fundamentally. They remained grateful for what they had, conscious of how easily it could have been otherwise, committed to helping others when they could. In 1890, Ophelia organized a charity concert to raise money for the new school being built on the edge of town. She gathered musicians from across Colorado, creating an evening of entertainment that drew crowds from neighboring towns. The concert raised enough money to fully fund the school's music program, ensuring that children in Pueblo would have access to musical education regardless of their families' financial situations. Theo built the school itself, donating his time and taking only enough payment to cover materials. When it opened in the fall of 1890, with James starting as a first-year student, both Ophelia and Theo attended the ceremony with pride, knowing they had helped create something that would benefit their community for generations. Life continued its forward motion. James proved to be an excellent student with his mother's love of music and his father's practical skills. Margaret grew into a lively, affectionate child who loved animals and seemed to have an innate ability to make friends wherever she went. The family attended church on Sundays, had dinners with friends, celebrated holidays with the kind of joy that comes from genuine contentment. In 1893, when Ophelia was 32 and Theo 35, they welcomed their third and final child, a son they named Samuel after Ophelia's father. It was an act of forgiveness and grace, acknowledging the man her father had been before alcohol destroyed him, honoring the few good memories she had from her childhood. Samuel was a calm baby, easier than either of his siblings had been, content to watch the world with curious eyes and rarely fussing. James and Margaret doted on him, and the house filled with the noise and chaos of a full, happy family. The turn of the century brought changes to Pueblo and the wider world. The railroad disputes that had caused so much trouble in the early years of Ophelia and Theo's marriage were long resolved, and the town continued to grow and prosper. New businesses opened, new families arrived, and the rough edges of the frontier town gradually smoothed into something more settled and civilized. But some things remained constant. Every evening that Ophelia played at the saloon, Theo would come to listen, sitting at the same table he'd occupied on that first night so many years ago. Sometimes he brought the children, teaching them to appreciate music and quiet attention. Other times he came alone, and on those nights Ophelia would play the pieces she'd composed for him over the years, songs that told the story of their love in ways words never could. "You ever get tired of listening to me play the same songs?" she asked him one evening in 1903 as they walked home together through the spring darkness. The children were with Mrs. Chen for the evening, giving them a rare moment of privacy. "Never," Theo said, the same answer he'd given the first time she asked that question 20 years earlier. "Your music changes every time you play it. I hear new things in it, layers I missed before. Besides, it's not really about the songs. It's about you creating beauty, sharing your gift. I'll never get tired of witnessing that. We've had a good life, haven't we?" Ophelia leaned against him as they walked, comfortable in the way of long marriage. "The best life," Theo agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was trailing cattle and sleeping under the stars, wondering if I'd ever find a place to belong. You found me instead." "I found everything," he corrected. "Love, family, home, purpose. All because I walked into an empty saloon one evening and heard you playing piano like your heart was breaking." "It was breaking," she said quietly. "I was so lonely, Theo. So afraid that I'd spend my whole life alone, playing music nobody cared about, slowly disappearing into myself. And now I'm surrounded by love. Now my music means something because I'm sharing it with people I care about. Now I have you and the children and a life I'm proud of." She stopped walking and turned to face him, the moonlight painting silver highlights in her dark hair. "Thank you for listening that first night. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for loving me." "It was the easiest thing I've ever done," Theo said, pulling her close and kissing her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day. "Loving you has always been easy, Ophelia. It's like breathing, necessary and natural and the thing that keeps me alive." They stood there on the quiet street, holding each other, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their shared loneliness. The years had marked them both, adding silver to his hair and lines to her face, but the love between them had only deepened and strengthened. The children grew. James developed into a talented musician and builder, eventually joining his father's construction business while playing piano at the Silver Star on weekends. Margaret became a teacher at the school her parents had helped establish, specializing in music education and carrying forward her mother's legacy. Samuel, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming interested in medicine, apprenticing with Dr. Morrison and eventually attending medical school in Denver. Ophelia and Theo supported all their children's dreams, providing encouragement and practical help whenever needed. They had learned from their own difficult childhoods what children needed most: unconditional love, genuine interest, and the freedom to become themselves rather than reflections of their parents' unfulfilled dreams. In 1910, James married a sweet-natured young woman named Catherine, and Ophelia and Theo became grandparents when Catherine gave birth to twin girls the following year. Margaret married in 1912, choosing a fellow teacher with a kind smile and gentle manner. Samuel finished medical school and returned to Pueblo in 1915, opening a practice and quickly becoming one of the town's most respected physicians. Through all the changes and celebrations, Ophelia continued playing piano at the Silver Star several nights a week, and Theo continued listening with that same focused attention he'd shown from the very beginning. It became something of a local legend, the couple who had fallen in love over music and maintained that love for decades, a testament to constancy in an ever-changing world. In 1920, Mr. Patterson died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. He left his share of the Silver Star Saloon entirely to Ophelia, making her the sole owner. She considered selling, but Theo encouraged her to keep it, pointing out that the saloon had been central to their story and remained an important part of the community. So she kept it, modernizing slowly over the years but maintaining the character that had made it special. She hired new performers, mentored young musicians, and created a space where art and entertainment could flourish even in a rough town that didn't always appreciate such things. The years passed in the way they do, quickly and slowly all at once. Ophelia and Theo grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love remaining strong. They marked their 40th wedding anniversary in 1924 with a huge celebration attended by seemingly half of Pueblo, a testament to the impact they'd made on their community. 40 years, Ophelia mused that evening as they sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. How is that possible? It feels like we just met. And it also feels like we've been together forever, Theo added. Time is strange that way. Do you have any regrets? She asked, a question they'd never quite voiced before. Not a single one, Theo said without hesitation. Well, maybe I regret not kissing you sooner that first night, but everything else. I do it all exactly the same way. Even the hard parts, the months when you couldn't find work, the times when money was so tight we didn't know how we'd manage. Especially those parts, he said firmly. Those struggles showed us what we were made of, individually and together. They proved that our love was stronger than circumstance. I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything because they made us who we are. Ophelia nodded, understanding completely. The hard times had been hard, but they had also been meaningful, teaching lessons that prosperity never could. She and Theo had learned to rely on each other, to communicate honestly, to find joy even in difficult circumstances. Those skills had served them well through 4 decades of marriage. As they sat together in the fading light, surrounded by the life they'd built, Ophelia felt profound gratitude for the music that had brought them together, for Theo's willingness to listen, really listen, seeing value in what she created, for their children and grandchildren, for the home they'd made and the community they'd served, for 40 years of love and partnership and shared purpose. Play something for me, Theo requested, gesturing toward the piano visible through the open door. One of your early pieces, the one you played that first night. So Ophelia went inside and settled at the piano, the same instrument Theo had bought for her all those years ago when they were newly engaged and full of hope. Her fingers found the keys, and she played the melody she'd created on that long-ago evening when she was lonely and broken and desperate for connection. But the music sounded different now, filtered through decades of love and life and experience. The loneliness was still there in the minor chords and searching progressions, but now it was answered by hope and resolution, by the knowledge that darkness doesn't last forever, and that sometimes prayers are answered in unexpected ways. Theo listened from the porch, his eyes closed, transported back to that evening in 1883, when he had stood in a saloon doorway and heard the most beautiful music he'd ever encountered. He remembered the ache of attraction, the desperate hope that this woman might see something worth loving in a rough cowboy with nothing to offer but honest work and a willing heart. She had seen it. She had loved him. And together, they had created something far more beautiful than either could have managed alone. When the music ended, Theo opened his eyes and found Ophelia standing in the doorway, backlit by lamplight, looking at him with the same affection she'd shown for 40 years. He held out his hand and she took it, settling beside him on the porch bench they'd worn smooth over decades of sitting together. "I love you, Ophelia Irving," he said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time he spoke them. "I love you, Theodore Irving," she replied. "Thank you for listening when I played only for you. Thank you for playing," he said. "For me and for the world, your music has brought more beauty into this life than you'll ever know." They sat together as full darkness fell, comfortable in silence, their hands clasped tight. Two people who had found each other in loneliness and built a life of meaning and love. Two souls who had recognized each other across an empty saloon and chosen, every day for 40 years, to keep choosing each other. The years continued forward, as they always do. Ophelia and Theo lived to see their grandchildren grow and thrive, to celebrate more anniversaries and milestones, to leave their mark on Pueblo and each other in ways both large and small. And on certain evenings, when the light was right and the world felt especially full of grace, you could still find them at the Silver Star Saloon. Ophelia would play piano with fingers that had grown stiff with age but never lost their skill, and Theo would listen with the same focused attention he'd shown from the very beginning. She played only for him, and he heard everything she couldn't say out loud. The music told their story, of love found and kept and treasured through all the years of their shared life. It spoke of loneliness transformed into belonging, of two broken people healing each other, of hope that refused to die even in the hardest times. And if you listened carefully, if you really paid attention the way Theo had taught himself to do decades ago, you could hear in Ophelia's music the sound of a life well lived and love that would endure long after the last note faded into silence. Their story became the kind of legend that Pueblo residents told their children and grandchildren, an example of what love could be when two people chose each other fully and completely, when they committed to building something beautiful together despite all obstacles. The empty saloon where they met, the piano that brought them together, the music that spoke what words couldn't express, all of it became part of the town's collective memory. Ophelia and Theo lived well into their 80s, growing old together with grace and gratitude. When Theo passed peacefully in his sleep in 1931, Ophelia mourned deeply, but not hopelessly. She knew they'd had more love and happiness than most people experienced in several lifetimes. She continued playing piano until her own death 3 years later, and local residents swore that on quiet evenings, you could still hear music drifting from the Silver Star, the sound of a woman playing only for the man she loved. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the legacy of love and music and honest work, building lives of meaning in the town their parents had helped shape. The house that Theo built with his own hands remained in the family for generations, and the piano he'd bought for Ophelia became a treasured heirloom passed down through the years. And sometimes, on particularly beautiful Colorado evenings, descendants of Ophelia and Theo would gather around that old piano, and someone would play the melodies she'd composed so long ago. The music would drift through open windows into the summer air, carrying with it the story of two lonely people who found each other in an empty saloon and built a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes, inspiring everyone who heard it to believe that true connection was possible, that listening mattered, that beauty could redeem even the loneliest soul. Their love story ended not with tragedy or dramatic flourish, but with satisfaction and peace, with the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved deeply and left the world better than they found it. In the end, that was all anyone could hope for, all that truly mattered. The empty saloon was empty no longer, filled instead with music and memory, and the enduring proof that sometimes, when you stop and really listen, you can hear the sound of your whole life changing, one beautiful note at a time.